good to be with you this morning on this beautiful, beautiful day. I'm the Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson, and on behalf of Gene's family, his brother-in-law Ralph, nephew Ryan, niece Katrina, grandnephew Miles, Katrina, who's joining us from England, I want to welcome you to this celebration of life for Eugene Edward Parvin, known to us all as Gene. We begin this service by lighting a chalice. It's a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, to which Gene contributed in this congregation. Life is a gift for which we're grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. And my job. Life is a gift for which we're grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. In the presence of life, we say no to death. In the presence of death, we say yes to life. In this time of grief, we light a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing hope and love. Let this flame of this chalice be a witness to the life that was Gene Parvin's, whose spirit burns in our hearts, whose memory gives us comfort, and whose life inspires all of us to live fully. It is good to be together. Once again, I bid you welcome. In gratitude for Gene, in gratitude for you, for Gene's chosen family, in gratitude for all that Gene is and was to all of us, I welcome you to this place, a space made sacred in this season of loss, with the spirit of love and friendship that you bring as we gather to remember Gene, to mourn his death, to celebrate his long life, and to celebrate a life well lived. We gather in this place, a place that Gene valued and shepherded through acts of service, love, and generosity. We gather as a community of friendship, of commitment, and of care. It is good to be together. to Carol and May for sharing your not-so-simple gifts with us. This reading is Oneness by the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, chosen by Ralph. Chosen by Katie, I think, Jean's niece. The moment I die, I will try to come back to you as quickly as possible. I promise it will not take long. Isn't it true I am already with you in every moment? I come back to you in every moment. Just look. Feel my presence. If you want to cry, please cry. And know that I will cry with you. The tears you shed will heal us both. Your tears are mine. The earth I tread this morning transcends history. Spring and winter are both present in the moment. The young leaf and the dead leaf are really one. My feet touch deathlessness, and my feet are yours. Walk with me now. Let us enter the dimension of oneness and see the cherry blossom in winter. Why should we talk about death? I don't need to die to be back with you. This reading reminds us that those we love who pass on are never really gone. They live within us. They live in the things that they loved, that when we see them with us. Eugene Jean Edward Parvin was born on July 24th, 1936, and died on May 18th, 2026. And in between was a long, remarkable life. I'm indebted to Ralph, Jean's brother-in-law, for sharing a detailed accounting of Jean's life, and I draw heavily on that in my remarks today. So thank you, Ralph. Jean was born in East St. Louis, Illinois, the only child of Guy Wilbur Parvin and Clarice Buttrod Parvin. Jean's father, who worked as a chief inspector at a steel foundry, was a fifth-generation American of Irish descent. Ralph notes it's a detail that Jean may not have known, but was consistent with Jean's gift of gab, and followed his tradition, the family tradition of being an active Mason and leader of Shriner programs, including a variety of public service positions and supporting Shriners hospitals. His father was also heavily involved in Boy Scouts, an interest that he also passed on to Jean. He died shortly before Jean started college. Jean's mother, who lived until 1997, ran a one-person beauty shop. She was also a member of the Shriners' sister organization, the Order of the Eastern Star, one objective of which was to send cards to neighbors and friends, which is a tradition not only that Ralph noted in his written obituary, but that I've heard from many of you, that Jean sent cards. We'll hear about jokes later. This is a gracious reminder that Jean cared about you and that he thought about you. Remembering sending cards is kind of a lost practice. After overcoming several illnesses and injuries when Jean was very young, he'd managed to break his collarbones, both of his collarbones, before his second birthday, and he still became a very active child. Now, I personally can't help but see the parallel between that and Jean's determination and tenacity to keep going despite physical challenges he had faced later in life. I remember not that long ago, maybe about a year ago, when he fell in the social hall, and the paramedics were there, and Jean wasn't going to go, and it took a great deal of persuasion. So he was definitely determined before, when he was a child, and throughout his life. High on his list of activities were Scouts, moving from Cub Scouts to earning a multitude of Boy Scout badges to reaching the rank of Eagle Scout, an achievement that he took pride in throughout his lifetime. While in high school, he also started following his father's footsteps in public service and his own curiosity, Ralph notes, by performing magic shows to groups of younger children and at Shriners meetings. He became very interested in photography, as many of you know. In later years, he renewed his public service by doing volunteer work for the Elmhurst Park District, the Elmhurst Symphony, and a variety of church committees right here. His comfort level in front of groups proved rewarding in a very tangible way. During his senior year of high school, he was selected to participate in a regional science fair, where his demonstration of various byproducts of the fermentation process earned him a scholarship from Illinois Wesleyan University, where he received his BS in biology and chemistry. Determined he was to excel. Shortly after graduation, he started working as a claims agent for Allstate Insurance near Belleville, Illinois, later moving to Lombard. He entered what became a failed marriage soon after college, after which he worked several other part-time jobs, once as an industrial photographer under the moniker Gene Parvin, the photographer. He also worked as a low-key private investigator, Eugene Parvin Investigations, where he specialized in documenting workmen's compensations, insurance fraud. In later years, his professional career moved from a forced early retirement at Allstate to becoming a regional claims manager for the teachers' insurance firm, Horace Mann, and finally becoming head of claims for the Metra Commuter Railroad, from which he fully retired in 2000. Ralph notes that Gene's life was literally restarted early in 1972. After several failed attempts, he convinced a young attorney that he'd met through work to go with him on a hayride. It was life-changing. He and Darlene Peterson were married, and we have Darlene on our photo here. So glad you sent me that picture to use. Because he and Darlene were so involved here in this congregation. They were married on September 29th, 1972 in Chicago, and then again the next day at Darlene's family farm near Burlington, Wisconsin. Why two marriage dates? As a precondition to getting an out-of-state marriage license, Gene had to provide his birth certificate, at which point he was very surprised to discover that he was listed as having died at birth. He had been ill, but luckily his mom was alive and could vouch for his existence. Gene quickly transformed from being a single individual to being an equal part of an inseparable couple, Darlene and Gene, deeply loving her even after Darlene's death in 2013. From the beginning, Gene supported Darlene in her quest for women's rights. After becoming an officer in the DuPage County Charter of the National Organization for Women, after Darlene became its Illinois state treasurer. For years, Gene used his photographic skills to document local and national meetings and marches, supporting the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. Sorry we didn't get that passed before Darlene and Gene passed. These works will be held at the University of Illinois Circle campus. Their life together was more than just work and political struggles. They enjoyed travel pleasures, first within the US and later abroad. They became entranced with the Southwest here in the US, both indigenous historical sites and art, as well as hiking and rafting the Grand Canyon and Snake Rivers. As high school graduation presents, they took their niece and nephew to the base of the Grand Canyon. Ralph notes that Gene spent most of the trip in a hotel room with food poisoning. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about meeting with the family and meeting with Ryan and Katrina is, your warmth and your memories of your aunt and your uncle who nurtured you and supported you, and you were part of their. It was family. It was family. To reflect the turn of the century, they spent over a week traveling across South Dakota in covered wagons. Later, they savored more relaxing riverboat trips along European rivers. Speaking of boats and savoring, two other joint passions, were sailing and cooking, especially after Darlene made a major career change from law to food service. For several years, they regularly attended residential cooking schools in the mountains of northern Italy, where Jean took an array of new aromas and affectionately became known as Gino. For over 30 years, they spent most of their weekends on the sailboat in South Haven, Michigan, either alone or with guests, especially those who offered to help keeping the hull clean. Did you too? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Ryan is sitting here affirming that. Adventures included nighttime crossing of Lake Michigan through a line of thunderstorms. Okay. Fortunately, the trip back was much less eventful, but Gene was not afraid of challenges. So I'm sure he met that one with his usual determination. And although they chose not to have children, they craved a feeling of family, which they filled with niece and nephew, and then Ralph knows two other sources, the community here at the Unitarian Church of Hinsdale, and their 3 sets of cats. Timmy and Katie were born in the hollow of a tree at Darlene's parents' farm, followed by Rusty and Dusty, and then finally Panther and Pounce, a blue-eyed deaf albino Siamese. She provided Gene exceptional comfort until the last few years of his life. This is the thing I like about this family. Ralph included the cats and remembered all of their names. So it tells us something about this family. It tells us they paid attention to one another, to care about one another, to remember the names of the pets, the cats that your beloved family member had, tells me a lot. And so does the care that you demonstrated for Gene throughout his life. Although he insisted on living alone in the house that he and Darlene had shared for almost their entire marriage, progressive loss of vision, mobility limitations, internal health issues continued to take a toll over the last 5 or 10 years of his life. And he was tenacious and persisted in remaining home. When I visited his home after he passed, numbers of us gathered after his passing, and I saw the staircase he scooched up backwards when he couldn't walk up the stairs. Gene was determined to stay in his home, but he never forgot to wear his hat to cover his increasingly bald hat, as Ralph mentioned, Pete. Through all the support he got from you all of you, kept him going, and it meant the world to him. I was so struck by the extraordinary care that you all showed Gene, and by the love and care of his beloved family, whose friendship endured over all those decades. When we gathered in the house after Gene passed, there was a Gene and Helen and a group of people from this church, and then another wave of people from this church came in and filled the living room. And that tells you the impact that someone has on a life when there's waves of people coming to simply sit in the space that you had visited frequently and where he sat with Darlene and the cats, and then by himself. Gene always lived for the moment, especially when it came to watching sports. He was an avid Packers fan and hated the Bears. He loved the Badgers, despised Notre Dame. He would frequently call you, Ralph, in the middle of games to complain about how the teams were playing and how the officials were being unfair to his team. Or even if he thought the commentators weren't being even-handed in the discussion of his favorites. Jean died at Elmhurst Hospital, Memorial Hospital in Elmhurst on May 18th, after several weeks of treatment for congestive heart failure and kidney disease. He experienced numerous physical and other medical issues during the recent years. This is what you need to know, y'all. He relished your hospital visits and his visits to home. He loved you. Now, you're wondering how I got this far without mentioning jokes. Ralph notes, in the end, he wanted to be remembered. What he wanted to remember by was that he had a sense of humor. He always had a joke ready for anyone's ears, some good, some were otherwise, some were repeated many times, but he also enjoyed sharing them, much as he enjoyed sharing his magic shows with youth. Now, our administrator, Linda, told me that he called every day to tell her a joke. Often repeated, but always welcome. So, friends, we pause, we say goodbye to Gene's physical presence, but his humor, his acts of service, his love remain. It is good to remember, and it is good to be together. Now we'll have a time of sharing from Ralph first, and then members of the congregation who said they want to speak, and then we'll open it up. How does that sound? You want to come on up, Ralph?
Thank you. Thank you for coming and remembering Jane. I have some props here, and most of them came from the process of cleaning Jane's house, which had not been done since my sister died, before my sister died. Probably 15 years of accumulated unorganization and a lot of history. It was also interesting that Gene's life really was started again when he met my sister and they got married. I knew almost nothing about his youth and found that we have a scrapbook out there, which was the first time I ever saw it, was when I was going through a closet, and another baby book that his mother had, and other information. And cards. We heard about cards. They sent cards to each other. They never threw them out. I have somewhere between 80 and 100 pounds of cards in our basement, waiting for them to be magically transformed into something. And then we talked about hats, further discoveries. I have my props here, and more props. I'm sure you all remember this. Okay. That. Okay. Then we have the football hats. Yes. An early hat, his beret. He went through a beret phase. He also had more hats, more football hats, but probably the most enjoyable one was a visor, which was simply Illinois Now for the National Organization for Women in his closet. He also had there something which was sort of like his second Bible. Garrison Keillor's Pretty Good Joke Book. I have not looked at this entirely, but I'm quite sure that many of these will also sound familiar. I also found, to my surprise, a 15th wedding anniversary card that my father made for them. And it's a cartoon. I will have this out later on, but the first panel shows the first date of the hayride. The one thing that I don't know if they had in fact met or only knew each other over the phone when they went on their first date. The second one was Gene's first trip to the farm, in which he had his nice new powerful Camaro, and my sister talked about the circular driveway, and he drove up the circular driveway and drove right over a snowdrift and got stuck miserably. Great way to make a first impression. Then the picture of the wedding, climbing the Grand Canyon, the sailboat with my sister at the tiller and Gene standing there blowing at the sail to try to get the boat to move. And the last frame is Gene and my sister at a protest or a rally. Gene carrying a sign "Now," and my sister carrying a sign "And Forever." And on the back, it's signed "Pop." There are a couple things that I found in the house that I thought were worth sharing. One of these was in my sister's sewing drawers, quilting materials, and it is a simple story of how to make a beautiful life. And I'll just read it. Love yourself. Make peace with who you are and where you are at this moment in time. Listen to your heart. If you can't hear what it's saying in this noisy world, make time for yourself. Enjoy your own company. Let your mind wander among the stars. Try. Take chances. Make mistakes. Life can be messy and confusing at times, but it's always full of surprises, and the next rock on your path might be a stepping stone. Be happy. When you don't have what you want what you have. Make do. That's a well-kept secret of contentment. There aren't any shortcuts to tomorrow. You have to make your own way. To know where you're going is only part of it. You need to know where you have been, too. And if you ever get lost, don't worry. The people who love you will find you. Count on it. Life isn't easy. Life isn't days and years. It's what you do with them and with all the goodness and grace that's inside of you that determines your life. Make a beautiful life, the kind of life you deserve. And then as we were going through other piles of things, we came across a Christmas card that Charlie sent to Jean this last Christmas. And he said, already a year since my mother dies, a year of mourning, grieving, and more. My family is very honored by your donation in the memory of my father and in the memory of my mother. With that, too, I thank you for your condolences spoken over the course of the years, your always good humor that keeps present moments positively moving, and your Christmas and seasonal greetings. Many thanks forevermore, and I cherish my memories of my parents more deeply every day. Now, just to make sure that I get the first shot at Jane, slight different here, I have the privilege of still remembering the very first and the very last jokes I heard from Jane. The first goes back to my sister at her time as a lawyer, and I am still a meteorologist, and we had this little debate going on between each other, which was what was worse, to be a shyster or a soothsayer. And Gene came up with a joke that he had heard, which was, what is the difference between a dead skunk and a dead lawyer on the road? Anybody remember this one?
Skid marks in front of the skunk.
Skid marks in front of the skunk. And then the last one was one that were among the last words he said in a video with my daughter. And it was, excuse me, it was the classic, what's the difference? When is a door not a door? This one I'm sure you've all heard. Together. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming here, and it's good to remember it.
All right, we're going to have folks from the congregation come on up, and so Chris.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Haney. I'm a member of the church here, and I'm also proud to say that Jean and Darlene were friends of ours, too, for a long time. I just wanted to open up here just by kind of bringing things together with the church and Jean and Darlene and ourselves here as members of this church. My wife and I became members of this church back in 2001. And back at that time, Reverend Ed Searle had a class called a New UU class, where you would come and learn about being a UU. And as Jean and Darlene had done in the past then too, they came from different religious traditions then too, and UU was later in their life. And so I remember we were at one point in the UU class, and Reverend Searle said, is there any other questions you might have about UU, Unitarian Universalism? And I said, do you guys have any sacraments at all? Because as a Catholic, I'm like, there's got to be some kind of is there communion, confession, something like that? And Reverend Ed looked at me in the typical Reverend Ed way that many of you know is like dumbass. I said, no, there aren't. But he said, would you like to have some? And I said, no, but during the course of our membership at the church, I came to learn about a lot of the different sacraments that we have. And the first one being coffee and cookies after the service, stone soup, the stone soup ceremony, Tim Dvorak's pizza every year. And then there's also a sacrament that I'm just going to hand out here really quickly. This is related to Jean. So you take one and pass it around. And you will get the side of this. So to tie this sacrament in with Jean, there was also, during the course of our membership in the church here, you got to know a lot of the different sounds that were repetitive in this church. There'd be the sound of the elevator coming up and down in the back. There'd be the sound of the door that would drive Karen McDowell crazy in the back, opening and shutting and slamming during a service. There would be the gong that we used to use to call to service here. But then most importantly, one of the biggest memories that my wife and I have of Jean and Darlene is Jean clearing his throat all the time. And what you have in front of you right now is opening a throat lozenge and using that to calm down his throat. So we never forget the one time, and this was pretty soon after Wendy and I became members of the church. We're sitting here, we're coming to, the time of sharing had ended. We're having then the musical interlude, for a moment of silence. And we're looking at Jean and Darlene. There are a couple rows in front of us, and we hear the crinkling of the wrapper opening, like we all of you know. And it kept crinkling and crinkling while the silence is going on. And then you can just see, from the back, Darlene, like this. And then more exaggeration on that, until finally it was just wham! Scooped up the lozenge out of Jean's hand, quickly opened it, and bam! Right back into his hand. And so it was at that point that Wendy and I knew that Jean and Darlene who are a lot like us, and we're going to be lifelong friends. So that's my memory of Gene and Darlene. We miss them terribly, and I want to next invite Mary Getty up to share some of her stories then too. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Getty. I'm a member of this congregation. Maybe I should take that Ricola. I live in Elmhurst, and I was part of the cohort that drove Gene back and forth to church over the years. So I heard many, many, many stories and many, many, many jokes. Excuse me. But I wanted to talk today about his generosity, but since we heard about the generous gift that he made to our church, then I think you already understand how generous he was with his assets. But I wanted to share a little bit of what I had learned from him about his generosity with his time. You know, we know that he was kind to his friends and never forgetting a birthday and calling to stay in touch to keep his connection strong. If he found a birthday card that he liked, he would buy a dozen because he had so many to send. He never turned down an opportunity to go to lunch, and he always picked up the tab. He and Darlene, of course, as you've heard, were very, very active in the ERA movement, and he was very, very proud of that and recounted those stories over the years. They had attended a UCC church in Elmhurst, but when they decided to move on from there, they came here, and they found that many of the people that they had worked with on the ERA, Julia and Tinker Harvey and others, attended this church, so they knew that they had found a home here. And over the years, Gene gave of his time to the church. He was on the finance committee, and he offered his expertise as an insurance claims adjuster to review policies, and he would always mention anything that he saw was a risk that needed to be addressed. And when we started the hospitality teams, he liked to sit at the visitors table and welcome new visitors whenever it was his turn. After he retired, Gene volunteered with the Elmhurst Park District. In those days of snail mail, Gene would go to the Park District office, I guess on a regular basis, and stuff envelopes that would send out to the citizens in the district. And not surprisingly, he made a lot of lasting friendships there. He also volunteered with the Elmhurst Symphony, and this was an organization that he was passionate about. He was attending their concerts until the end. His volunteer job was to contact WFMT to give them free concert tickets that the radio station used in their phone promotions. Gene he did this enthusiastically for several years. I attended one of the symphony's concerts with Gene and was very impressed when the symphony director recognized him for his years of service by presenting him with an award. He was applauded by a full house of concert goers. I was so thrilled with Gene that I decided everyone should know about his good work. So the next Sunday at Joys and Concerns, I shared this with the congregation. And Gene got very, very annoyed with me. This was his business. It wasn't anybody else's. So he was modest about his good work and generosity, and might think those of us gathered here today are making too much of him. We're not, of course. We're barely giving him his due.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Williams, and I have known Gene and Darlene for pretty much the whole time that we were members here. We joined in 2004, and so we met them early in our time here. Dave, my husband, joined in 2004. But I think the first time I actually spoke with Gene at length was at one of the Day at the Farm events that he and Darlene offered up in Wisconsin in the church auction every year. And like many people here, I got to know Gene better after Darlene's passing. And I've often wondered why Gene liked to tell jokes so much. And My suspicion is it's because they helped him break the ice during his many years handling contentious insurance things. When you're engaging with someone on potentially hostile terms, a joke, even a bad one, can help ease the tension. And as we know, it became his calling card. In recent years, though, I think many people didn't realize that Gene was, for all intents and purposes, functionally blind. While he could discern his surroundings, he had little useful sight in the center of his visual field. Reading, writing, filling out forms, researching things on a computer, ordering from a menu, and even navigating an unfamiliar TV remote had become nearly impossible for him without incredible effort and a good magnifying glass. But he hid it well to casual acquaintances and strangers. When I'd visit him at the hospital sometimes, I would just be watching him try to deal with the menu, you know, and because he really couldn't deal with it very well. And he would have all these little workarounds he would do with the people in the dietary department, you know, to make sure he got the same thing every day, and, you know, without having to call it in, because navigating the menu and doing the calling was a challenge. And I think a lot of times the people taking care of him in the hospital didn't even appreciate how limited his vision was, and that's the way he wanted it. So, but he was really fortunate to have a very sharp memory until the end, and he worked out a lot of systems for being able to function. You know, he had a whole system for his cards, which he kept by the computer, and he had a whole system with his date book, you know, where he would put things in the date book when they had to be sent out, and it was remarkable. You could tell how much of a struggle it was, though, to write addresses on the envelopes, because they'd kind of be slanting and challenging to read, but, you know, it was very important to him to remember his friends on their important days. But on the plus side of not being able to use the computer much or read mail or what have you, he was spared most of the online nonsense that masquerades as entertainment. And he was pretty impervious to being scammed once he stopped answering the phone, only calling back the people he wanted to talk to. But if you ever wondered why Gene didn't greet you by name if you attended Wise Elders with him, or you talked often at church with him, it's because he had a hard time connecting names and faces. And I think jokes helped him engage with people in spite of his visual difficulties. He liked making people smile, and he could do that with a joke, even if he didn't know you well or had trouble recognizing you. And I will point out here that he got in the habit of calling me almost every morning, weekday morning, in the last couple of years. And he would call at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I am not a morning person. And I tried really politely to say, Gene, yeah, it's a little early for me. But he always wanted to say hi and tell a joke and just chat for a few minutes. And, you know, I just decided it was so important to him, wasn't gonna push back any longer. I just talked to him at 8 o'clock in the morning, even if I was half awake. As Gene's health declined in the last few years, there was some pressure to move into a more age and place-friendly environment, which he resisted mightily. We've heard all of that. He had many workarounds to function in his two-story home. He had a little pulley system with a basket to get things upstairs, and he would insist that you go up the stairs in front of him so you wouldn't see what he was going through to get up the stairs. And it just became kind of scary, and especially after he tripped and broke a couple of vertebrae. But he was just so determined. And he did do fine, you know, in spite of it, although he did acknowledge that he was lonely and a little depressed sometimes. But more recently, he told me that he didn't want to leave his home because his memories of his beloved Darlene were there. Sorting through all their shared possessions, reliving the stories that went with them, and leaving what he and Darlene had built together would have been too heartbreaking for him. And of course, navigating a new environment with new people would have been quite daunting given his visual challenges. Speaking of memories, another place Gene loved to be was the Peterson family farm in Wisconsin, as you heard. We accompanied him there a couple times in recent years, and he had hoped to go again this year. Being at the farm enabled him to revisit all the happy times and memories he'd had there with Darlene and her family. Gene also enjoyed taking friends to his favorite shops and restaurants in the area, and he loved a home-grilled meal of fresh sweet corn and Wisconsin butcher shop bratwurst while relaxing in farm country, even if the wind was blowing the wrong way. There were cows in the area. Although Gene was running out of new jokes of late, one day during his final illness, he told me a crude joke with a double punchline requiring perfect timing, and he nailed it, catching me completely off guard. He'd tell you those jokes when he knew you well enough and knew you wouldn't get offended. After landing the second punchline, he sat there with a huge grin on his face, like a kid who was gonna just get in so much trouble, and he didn't even care. And that's how I will remember him. In the end, Gene and Darlene were two wanderers who had big plans to travel the world together in retirement, which sadly never came to pass. I want to believe that their souls reconnected in the afterlife, and they are now cruising the universe together, making up for lost time.
Hi, I'm Dave Lloyd. I'm also a member of the congregation. As we age, our world contracts. When you retire, you're not at work every day. You don't see the whole bunch of people every day or even on Zoom. And as you get older and older, members of your cohort move away or pass away. And it's easy to become isolated and easy for everything to become small. And Gene embodied that saying that to make a friend, be a friend. And we've heard sending cards, inviting people. Suzanne and I were the beneficiaries of his taking us to the Elmhurst Symphony and up to the farm. And as someone said, he would always spring for lunch. And he would always talk with people at church. Sometimes it's, can you take me somewhere? Can you help me out with this? And typically younger people, so that he'd always have a group of people who he knew would be around. And when he found out who you were and what you were involved in, he would find things that you had in common. Found out I was a lawyer, and my whole career has been in the debtor-creditor area, either holding off those predatory creditors or squeezing money out of deadbeats. And his career was in the insurance business, busting fraudsters. So we bonded around the concept from, if you remember the TV show House, with Dr. House always solving those medical mysteries. He would never believe what the patients told him, because as he told his staff, everybody lies. And that's what Gene and I had in common. Everybody lies. Yeah. The check's in the mail. I'm sure I sent you the money. Or I'm sure I sent that notice before I popped the guy's car. And he would have stories of, oh yeah, my arm really hurts from the accident. My arm really hurts from the accident. And then jokes, and people keep talking about the jokes, but I've only heard a couple. But I brought some. The jokes that are written down are in my other pair of pants. But I remember these. Jesus is at the Last Supper, and a reporter comes in and says, well, what if somebody told you that someone here would betray you? And Jesus said, separate checks, please. Or, the lawyer joke with the skunk. Another is, what do you call 99 lawyers in a ship in the middle of the ocean with a slow leak? A good start. Or, people say that heaven is above and hell is below, but they're really next to each other. And there's a fence between them. And both God and the devil have to maintain the fence. And the devil's not keeping up his side. And God says, well, if you don't pick up your side of the fence, I'm going to have to sue you. And the devil says, where are you going to find a lawyer? Gene talked about collecting jokes, and he typed them up. And we have pages and pages of his jokes. One of the contributions that Gene made to the church every year is he would put up money for a match the contribution at our church auction. And that was always the fun part, because we could make fun of Gene, who was sitting right there, and squeeze money out of him. Well, in our church auction later this year, we will have something involving the transcripts of Gene's jokes so that they can be shared with the whole congregation.
We all have pieces of a life, don't we? We do have a tradition in our congregation to open up to more sharing. So if anyone has anything that you'd like to share, I'm going to invite you to come on up. You can come up here, or I can give you the mic. Okay, I got Tony coming.
I'm Tony Members, a member of the church, and I remember, I also joined early 2000s, and I remember meeting Gene and Darlene at that time, and I think by then she had moved on from the attorney phase, and she was at the College of DuPage, involved in the hospitality program. And I have, over the years, donated my talents to the church in the forms of bands, and at that time, I was doing jazz trios. And Darlene was very involved in the fundraiser for the hospitality program. I believe it was called Traditions and Excellence. And she asked me if my trio could perform, and it just turned out that she would ask me then every year, and of course, so she was kind of my connect, but then getting to know Gene over these many years was just a blessing, and I wasn't in the regular rotation, but I'd get that call, hey, Tony, you going to church this Sunday? I'd like to catch a ride with you. And so we kind of had a little, we would negotiate, or we'd have some, well, choir practice is at 9. He goes, oh no, that's too early. I'll find somebody else. But many times I would say, I can take you home after church. So we spent a lot of time together, and as Dave mentioned, he got to know you, and I'm by education mechanical engineer, but he knew that music was one of my passions, and we had a lot of conversation about music, and of course, a generous feeding of jokes. So I really loved them. I loved them both, and I'm so happy to share.
Oh, take your time.
If it weren't for Gene approaching me to tell me a joke or two, I might never have really interacted with him, and that would have been sad. And I know we're all going to miss his jokes. And the way my brain works, I have trouble falling asleep because I keep thinking of things that other people can do that I don't have to do. And I thought, we don't have to have the jokes stop. We can pass that on amongst ourselves. Why not, when you come to church tomorrow, you come prepared with a joke, and you approach somebody with coffee in your hand, and you share your joke. And Nancy Kranz, I haven't run this by you, but it also occurred to me, we could maybe have a joke a week in the news and notes. And so I have a couple jokes for you. Dave, you mentioned Jesus at the Last Supper. Do you know what he said to his apostles?
If you want to be in the picture, you got to come on this side of the table. And I often wondered why it took Moses 50 years to wander. 40, thank you. I'm really bad at remembering details. Well, he's a man. He never asked for directions. And these are from the musical Nonsense, which I saw a few weeks ago. And what's the last one? Oh, please, Karen. Oh, please, Jean, help me. Oh, how do you make holy water? You boil the hell out of it. Uh-oh.
Is there anyone else? Mana?
Ryan, I am nephew. Didn't really prepare to say anything today, but have been moved by all of your memories, things of the early phone calls. My wife and I joked that we kept the landline primarily so Gene would never remember the cell phone numbers, and he'd always call. And once the kids got a little bit older and we were able to sleep in a little bit, if there was a call before 8 a.m. on a Saturday, we knew it wasn't anything dire, it was just Gene calling. And as somebody who's been teaching music in the schools for 30 years, his love of the symphony and always calling with, oh, I just heard this played. He and I had a great disagreement about the significance of and the enjoyment of Mahler. I was pro, he was not. But the collection at home of all the WFMT CDs that he'd get from his donations, and he'd just share off with us. As my sister and I were younger, we were living in Washington, D.C., and I think as a respite for, we were twins, as a respite for my parents, they would ship us out here to the Midwest for a long week. We'd spend a weekend with Petey and Jean, Darlene and Jean on their sailboat, which taught me a love of sailing. Yes, there were chores, sanding the teak, scrubbing the deck, all sorts of things. But the first time we went out, they didn't really have kids. We were the closest things they had to young kids, and I think we were probably 8 or 9 the first time we went out. You shipped us away. And we flew into O'Hare and drove around, and at that point they had the Corvette and the Camaro. And the only way 4 of us were going any place was in the back of a very tiny back seats of a Camaro, and they were so worried we wouldn't like what was happening. They packed in between Katie and I a very small portable TV, but that took up a good chunk in case we got bored at the boat. And while they were unsure of themselves on their success at parenting teenagers at the time, they were great at it. And they had a knack for it. And it was and I'm sure when they dropped us off at the farm for the rest of the week, they were, whew, that's done. But their caring for everybody was looking back, something that we saw during those times. And that caring and the generosity is something we've heard a lot today. And I want to say thank you for the caring and the generosity that you gave both of them. While we're just in Madison, it is still 2 hours, 2.5 hours each way to come down here. And when there's emergencies, of course, we're coming down. But he never felt pressured to say, Ryan, Ralph, can you come and take me to the grocery store? He had you. And I want to thank you for that. And so, yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? For all the memories that we've heard and for all the ones that we're holding in our hearts, to invite you into a time of silence, silent reflection as you think about Gene, his presence in, through, and among us still. I always love it when families are able to put together a life in images. So let's go. How lovely to be remembered so well and so fondly. I invite you into a litany of remembrance, which is one that we share in most of our Unitarian Universalist memorial services, or celebrations of life, as we call them, because this really truly has been a celebration of a life, hasn't it? A life well lived, well loved, of care and concern and generosity and joy and jokes. So your response is, we remember him. In the rising of the, and we are remembering Jean here. I did not know Darlene, but it is so clear that we are remembering her as well. And I know you had a beautiful memorial service for her. So however Spirit moves you to say him or them, I invite you to use that language, whatever fits for you. In the rising of the sun and in its going down. In the blowing of the wind and in the rains of winter, we remember him. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring. In the blueness of the sky and the warmth of summer. In the rustling leaves and the beauty of autumn. In the beginning of the year and when it ends. When we are weary and in need of strength. When we are sick and lost at heart. When we have joys we yearn to share. When we have jokes we want to share, we remember him. Yes, we remember him. As long as we live, Jean shall live, for he is now part of all who have known him. We extinguish this chalice with these words: in mystery we're born, in mystery we die, we live, in mystery we die, in mystery we are held. And beloveds, may the Spirit of life and your companion in death be with you in your going forth. May you know peace beyond understanding, faith in the goodness of life, hope in the possibilities of life, and the love that is ever at work in this life. Go in peace, be makers of peace, and amen. And please join the family and all of it. Well, let's all just get together after the service and have some food in Jean's honor.